Well, folks, welcome again to the International Euphonium Summit. I'm your host, Nicholas Haffter von Heide, and today we have a special guest and really interesting because we're doing this recording September 6, 2023, and this particular guest is the second baritone for the Cory band, which is going into the British Open Championship this weekend, 4 days away? 4 days
Yes.
away. And so we have a really awesome chance to catch them on this. And if you haven't gotten to listen to the podcast yet, we kind of dive into that before this. And so go check that out. I'll leave the links to your favorite podcast format below once this goes live. And it'll be amazing to do the second part of the series and getting the after competition review and all that good stuff. Really looking forward to this Saturday as well. And so welcome to the platform, Dr. Joel Collier.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get started with your musical background. When did you start with music in general?
I came from a musical family. My parents actually met playing in a brass band together. So music was always part of what was happening in our home. So I started very young. I picked up my mom's cornet when I was about 4 years old, mostly just making noises, but they wanted to make sure that we were making noises properly. And also started piano lessons around the same time. Again, they were just with my mother or my grandmother, and it was just teaching little bits about, where are the white keys and the black keys. But I started learning both instruments, brass and piano, at 4 years old. So I don't remember a time in my life that I didn't play.
So kind of diving into this, and I'll leave your bio will be a separate video and might be the intro to this eventually. So Dr. Joel Collier is not only a euphonium performer, an amazing artist internationally, but he's also a composer, a conductor, and educator. So composers, if you haven't listened to any by chance of the other interviews, most of our composers start on piano. So that's kind of a typical rule of thumb. So would you contribute that piano to your grandmother's?
Yeah, a bit. My maternal grandmother played piano, and then my mom also played. So I definitely learned in my early years. I was definitely learning from them. They are who set me on that foundation for playing, and I had them to look up to for playing as well when I was younger. So yeah, absolutely. And piano, especially from a composer's perspective, the piano is so useful just because you can visualize and you work with those harmonies and things right in front of you. So if you have those piano skills, it just makes that much easier rather than having to fight through each chord.
Absolutely. So you mentioned your family was part of a brass band. Do you care to dive into that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I grew up in the Salvation Army, and so Salvation Army is very well known for its brass band tradition. And that is actually where I got all of my early brass training. My parents met in a brass band. Well, they kind of have two meeting stories. Once was at a brass band camp in New Jersey outside of New York, but then really as they met again in Philadelphia, where I then later grew up and where my mom is from. So the whole idea of brass band that was my entire childhood, my entire upbringing, listening to my parents play in bands. And then once I started playing, having the opportunity to sometimes even sit alongside them, even in my developmental years. We were a family of five, and the five of us played together as a brass quintet many times. So.
Oh, that's really awesome. So going from cornet and piano and taking lessons from both your mom and your grandmother, what instrument did your dad play?
So my dad plays a lot of different instruments, but growing up, I really knew him as a trombone player, and actually over the years, the vast majority of the time that I've seen him play, it's been either trombone or baritone. So there was one particular season in a brass band that we got to sit in, well, no, two different ones where we sat in the same row together. One season when I was playing trombone, sitting next to him, and then fast forward 2 years later where I was playing euphonium and he was playing baritone in the row.
Oh, that's amazing. So for our newer artists and for those that are catching this for maybe the first time, baritone and euphonium are somewhat interchangeable in our world, in our spectrum. And they have two specific functions within two different different functions in a brass band, different tone qualities, and a lot of our maybe our non-musical parents who are part of this see their student artist with a baritone bell front or with a upright bell baritone, and they're like, well, my student has a baritone. Yes, there's similar fingerings and everything like that, but in all reality, when it's on a professional stage, two different sounds, two distinct sounds. And do you care to elaborate on that just a little bit for our younger families?
Absolutely. The euphonium is the one that is actually much more common to see. It's the larger instrument. It looks like a small tuba. And that's the one that has, as the name would suggest, the beautiful sound. It is a very rich and deep, dark sound for, especially played at the professional level. The baritone plays in the same register as the euphonium, the same range, but it has a slightly brighter sound. It's somewhere, I like to say, halfway between the euphonium and a trombone. So it bridges that gap between the bright sound of the trombone and the rich sound of the euphonium, which gives composers and bands another color to choose from when they're dealing with brass instruments. It occasionally gets used in wind band as well. So as your student grows, things like pieces like Lincolnshire Posy, which are very important pieces of the wind band repertoire, do call for baritone. And a lot of the upper ensembles that play those pieces will actually have someone play it on a baritone rather than a euphonium. So it does get used outside of the brass band, but much more rarely than the euphonium does.
Which is really interesting. As we covered in our podcast before this, we went live here, so go back and check it out. The baritone with the local band systems and the communities, as in the United States, I think we're going to begin to see more and more brass bands grow like it was back in the 1800s, early 1900s even. And we have Aaron Vanderveel has an amazing student. We got to interview him on here, and real passion with youth brass bands and outside of the Salvation Army core of bands and stuff like that, and which is really cool to know that there's the function of a community band system, but with the Salvation Army band system and the ability to have your student come in and learn 2 days a week, be among the best in the community, typically the best in the community. It really is. They really have a great mentorship program. And I would love to see more in our communities. Just saying, I'm not one for the Salvation Army system, just because our core, I think, relocated or closed down here because the support just wasn't there at the time. And I hope to see that grow back up again. I think that's possible and very doable, especially with this platform. So if you have, we'll leave links to the territories for the Salvation Army corps around your community. And if you are curious about it and don't know where to go, start with the links below or just message us, and Dr. Joel Collier will help you out, or one of many will jump on and get you hooked up for, you know, beginning euphonium artists to baritone artists to trombones, trumpets, cornets, French horns, not really mellophones though, but French horns.
It's okay.
That's right. Tubas. And is there percussion?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what typically do you see? And we're kind of taking a tangent now from your early childhood. Oh man, I think we're gonna wait
Okay.
on that. So
Yeah.
with the brass bands and growing up, what was your first moment with the euphonium, or was it with baritone first?
As I mentioned, I started on cornet and then I moved to tenor horn when I was 8, and just trying to find a mouthpiece that was a better fit. And then when I was 9, the summer I was at that music camp there when I was 9 is when I switched to euphonium. I did actually play on euphonium first in the little ensemble that we had. So 9 years old was when I got there. I did do a little bit of flip-flopping back and forth between euphonium and baritone over that next year or two. But really by the time that, you know, 9 is when I first got there. And by the time that I was 12 years old, really, I said, yes, I'm a euphonium player. And yes, over the course of my career, I would play other instruments, trombone, baritone, tuba, but really euphonium became my primary instrument solidified by the time that I was 12.
Awesome. So with that identity shift and accepting your, you know, yourself as a euphonium player, and, you know, what was it like going, were you in the public school system as well?
No, so I was actually homeschooled K through 12, which actually puts me in an interesting position because I never played in a school band. I never played in a wind band. I never played in a marching band. The first time that I played in a wind band was my first semester of my bachelor's degree when I made it to college.
Wow.
So yeah, so I had no wind band experience prior to college, and no marching band experience at all. So my journey is a little bit different than most.
Well, let's dive into that because I want to really capture that, because, you know, a lot of homeschool parents are, you know, going online to find out, you know, what training their student can take on. So this is going to be, I think this is going to be bring high value to those that are homeschooling or want those additional resources. So what was it like being homeschooled, you know, in being surrounded by all these musicians in the Salvation Army band and your family?
Right. Yeah, that was really the advantage, and the reason it worked for me is I had people in my life regularly that were doing music. It was this thing where I was just surrounded by it all the time. So my interest in it was being able to be supported by my family, by my peers at the Salvation Army that I was attending for church and things like that. So that is where I had all of my musical experiences. You know, playing in church every Sunday, playing at home, practicing, and having my parents shout up the stairs, you know, it's supposed to be an F sharp, not an F natural. Things like that really helped in my development, even though I didn't have the school band experience where I was having regular experience with a band director. So it was different, but I still was being exposed very much to this musical education side, musical ensemble side. And so it didn't look the same as a school band, but I had the band experience as well. And the advantage was, as I grew up, when I was homeschooled, I was able to take other opportunities that some of my friends in school couldn't take. Things that I remember being in high school, and at one point in time, there was a brass band at Westchester University that was founded by who's become a friend of mine while he was a student there. And I remember that my dad and my brother and I went and played in that brass band when I was, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, because we had a contact there and I had the flexibility in my schedule to be able to do that. And other things that came up over the years, I remember my senior year of high school, I did a performance of Eric Owazin's Symphony and Brass with the Curtis Institute of Music Brass and Percussion Ensemble. Again, through a contact that recommended me to the director. They needed a euphonium player because, for those who don't know, Curtis Institute of Music, their brass department only fills the seats that they need for their orchestra. And since euphonium is not in the orchestra, they didn't have somebody at that school and they needed euphonium. And they had a contact. I had the flexibility in my day to go to their daytime rehearsals. And so I was able to perform with that phenomenal brass and percussion ensemble, even as I was a senior in high school before I started my collegiate career.
Wow. That's remarkable. So what was it? So did you participate in the all region or the UIL stuff going on in the high school?
I did not. That if I were doing it again today, I probably would. There's a lot more availability to homeschool families now than there was when I was a student in the 90s and early 2000s. It had just started to become an accepted thing that homeschool students would be able to participate. But by that point, I was already finishing high school and I was already playing in Atlantic Brass Band, for example. So I didn't feel the need to, at that point, jump into those kinds of things because I had so many other outlets already. But it is something that is now available to more and more homeschool families, and is a great resource if you don't come from a family like mine that was very musical.
Right, absolutely. That's a great recap there on that. So who would you say would be your kind of the first mentor for euphonium? Would that be your dad?
Well, really, my parents pushed me as a musician,
Sure.
absolutely, but it wasn't so much any kind of instrument specific influence. I remember very specifically the very first person that I remember looking up to and saying, absolutely, I want to do what he does. It was a guy named Drew Copeland, and I've talked to Drew over the years when I was in my doctoral studies. He no longer plays, but he was incredibly influential as I was a young teenager, really. He was an undergraduate student, and he was playing principal euphonium in the brass band that my mom was playing in at the time. And I just remember seeing him play stand-up solos or play in the band and just think, that's what I want to do. And his second euphonium that was next to him, a woman named Rachel Kane, she was also just an absolute role model for what I wanted to be as a musician. She was also a phenomenal singer, and that also influenced the way that I thought about her as a musician. And so those were really the first two that were absolute icons for me as a euphonium player.
Wow. Have you kind of recapped that journey and your gratitude for them as you're sitting in the second chair, in the second seat baritone with the Cory band? Have they reached back out to you for when? I mean, you just got announced the Cory position, according to resources that I've seen. May 23rd, 2023 was your official start date.
Yeah, I started about 2 weeks before that, but that was the official announcement of my start with the band. Yes.
So it must have been really cool. Did you reach back out to your mentors there, Drew and Rachel, and let them know?
I haven't talked to the two of them. Honestly, I haven't talked to either of them since I was in my doctoral studies, but I did that same kind of recap then. And that was the thing. As I was finishing my doctorate in euphonium, I did kind of reach out and say, I don't know if you realize just how important you were in my development, but thank you, and here's where I am now. And many of my other mentors over the years that followed are people that I'm still in regular contact with because they're still playing and they're still very busy in the euphonium world. You've mentioned Aaron Vanderweel. He was a huge, huge influence in my life. I saw him actually in England in March when he was on tour with the New York Staff Band before I started my official tenure with Cory, but word had already kind of gotten around. And so we were able to have that moment then when I saw him there, where we kind of had that recap of, yes, you did this, you made this happen for me. The influence that you had in my life has really put me where I am now.
That's incredible, to being able to be in a place to where you recount that, and you just, shout back to, those before you. And I look forward to the day of someone seeing this interview and being inspired by what you're saying and your journey, and being inspired by it, and hopefully reaching back out to you saying, hey, I was in a rough spot, I was a homeschool kid, or take any other part of or facet of your journey and saying, hey, something you said really mattered and it really impacted me. And Dr. Collier, here's where I am today, and might be in a competing brass band.
Could be. Honestly, I hope so. I would really welcome that.
Yeah, it'd be really awesome. I love good competition. It spurs on one another, and to bring your best no matter what, not only for yourself, but with your colleagues.
Absolutely.
So that's really awesome. Man, so it's fascinating that your musical journey, it is quite unique. And I think for the homeschool, I think it's going to be a winner for the homeschool families. I'm definitely going to share this with my homeschool network. Hey, you got to check this interview out, this conversation, and follow this series. It's going to be really fantastic. And so I think that's a great way to wrap up your high school, your beginnings. And I can't wait to dive into your first wind band experience as a bachelor's degree. That's just it's not the normal journey.
Yeah,
no, right? But I mean, even your Curtis experience, diving into that, we'll probably dive into that as well, because that's not that's a little abnormal as well. That's totally God, I think. So if you are watching this live, go back into the podcast. We're going to continue this as an after action review after we stop the recording. I want to thank everybody for tuning into the first series for Dr. Joel Collier. Thank you so much for coming out and being a guest on this as well. Having rehearsal in 4 hours?
In 2 hours.
2 hours. Cool beans. Well, jump over to that side and follow us there, and share this with a homeschool family that you think would, gain really a lot of value from this, as well as, any musician, because I think there's a lot of value here, as well with all the interviews and conversations. So thanks everybody for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next series with Dr. Joel Collier. Thanks everyone.